She stood at the edge of the range like she had done 100 times before, her stance steady, her breathing calm, the sun catching the edges of her dark hair as she loaded each round with practiced ease. Her movements were efficient, precise, not rushed, not slow, just measured, like someone who knew every second counted, even when it looked like nothing was at stake. Around her were the usual sounds of practice shots, shouted commands, metal hitting metal, and the sharp scent of gunpowder hanging in the dry desert air. To anyone watching, she was just another civilian, maybe former military, maybe just a regular woman who liked to shoot, who found focus and peace in the rhythm of targets falling and brass clinking to the ground. She wore plain clothes, jeans, boots, a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat, and a pair of sunglasses that hid most of her face from curious eyes. She talked to no one, not even the instructor who had welcomed her that morning with a short nod and a clipboard. She signed her name without hesitation, handed over her ID, and walked straight to her lane. From a distance, no one noticed the man watching her. He stood behind the glass inside the operations booth, his arms crossed, his jaw set, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of a worn Navy cap. The patch on his chest read SEAL Commander R.E. Maddox, a man known on this base and beyond for his sharp instinct and his colder judgment. He had seen thousands of shooters in his life, military, private contractors, even intelligence assets, but something about this one made him pause. It was not the way she shot, though that alone was remarkable. Her form was perfect, her groupings tighter than most men he had deployed with. Her discipline matched that of someone with years of combat behind them, but there was something deeper, something beneath the surface, like a mask she wore not just on her face, but on her entire body, a stillness, a silence that did not fit with the image she projected, a silence that came from knowing too much, from seeing too much and choosing never to speak of it again. The moment came quickly, without warning. She reached up to adjust her sleeve, and for the briefest second the fabric caught and pulled back, revealing the inside of her forearm where a tattoo shimmered against her skin. It was small, not flashy, a symbol made of jagged lines and sharp curves, ancient in design, simple but deliberate and unmistakable to the trained eye. It looked almost like an insignia, but not one worn by any official force, at least not anymore. The SEAL Commander stiffened, his hand dropping from his mouth to the radio clipped to his vest, his voice low and sharp. Get me her file now. Who cleared her? Who signed her onto the range? I want everything. But even as he spoke, he was already moving down the hallway toward the exit, his boots striking the floor with growing urgency. He knew that mark. He had seen it only once on a mission that had never made it into the system, a mission that was supposed to be classified for eternity, because what they found was not meant to be found outside. The wind picked up dust curling across the lot as she finished another magazine and reloaded in a smooth, practiced motion. She noticed him only when he stopped 5 feet behind her, his shadow falling across the range line. The murmurs behind them quieted as shooters glanced over, curious but wary. The air shifted like the desert itself was holding its breath. She did not turn, she only said, "You are blocking my light." Stepped closer, his voice lower than before. "Where did you get that tattoo?" She paused for a heartbeat, maybe, to then turned slowly and pushed her sleeve back up, not hiding it, not explaining it, just letting him see it fully. She held his gaze through the dark lenses of her sunglasses and said, "I was told no one would recognize it anymore. I was told no one alive still knew what it meant." Commander stared at the ink. The lines burned into his memory from that cold night in Eastern Europe years ago, when they had breached the bunker and found what should not have been there: the files, the tapes, the bodies, and the mark carved into the wall over and over like a warning or a prayer. The same mark now on this woman's arm. "How do you know what that is?" he asked, and she tilted her head slightly, like someone considering whether the truth was worth the consequence. "Cece was there," she said simply. "I survived, and then I vanished, because that was the deal. They let me walk away. No name, no story, no trace, just silence and this mark, and the promise that no one would come looking for me, not unless the others started waking up. And if you are here now asking about it, then I need to know how many are left and how much time we have. It said nothing at first, only stared at her face, searching for the lie that was not there. The steel in her voice told him everything he needed to know. The truth was not just in the tattoo, it was in her eyes, in the way she carried herself, and the way she had blended into the range, like she was waiting for someone to finally recognize what she had been trying so hard to forget. You need to come with me, he said, and she nodded without protest, gathering her gear with quick, quiet efficiency, like she had done this before, like she had known this day would come and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. The other shooters watched them leave, not knowing what they had just witnessed, not knowing that history had just shifted a little on its axis because a woman with a forgotten mark had been seen by the wrong man, or maybe the right one. The wind held across the range, carrying with it the echoes of something ancient, something buried and restless, something waiting in the dark to be remembered. The drive back to the secure wing of the base was silent. The commander kept one hand on the wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, but his thoughts pulled backward through time to that forgotten mission, to the things they saw, the ones they lost, and the single piece of evidence that made it all too real. Now sitting beside him in the passenger seat was the last living thread to that day, a woman who should not have existed anymore, a shadow walking in daylight, and yet she looked calm, almost detached, as if none of this surprised her at all, as if she had lived each day expecting the past to come knocking again. Part in a restricted zone, flashing his credentials and waving off the guards who tried to ask questions. The woman stepped out without being told. Her movements measured, her gaze scanning the area in quiet calculation, like she was mentally mapping every exit, every camera, every guard, every threat. He noticed it and filed it away. She had done this before, maybe more times than even she remembered. Inside the building, the air turned cooler and thicker with the weight of buried secrets and unspoken truths. They passed through 3 levels of clearance and arrived in a secure interrogation room, but the commander did not cuff her, did not restrain her. He simply gestured to the chair, and she sat down with the posture of someone who had once worn a uniform and lost the right to wear it long ago. Ha sat across from her, leaned forward, and said, I need to know everything, starting with how you ended up here. Why now? Why this base? She looked at him, then really looked at him, and said, I did not choose this place. It was chosen for me. I was told to disappear. I did. I went dark. I kept the promise, but 2 weeks ago I felt something shift, something wake up. It started as a dream at first, a place I had never seen and yet knew perfectly, a voice calling my name, not mine exactly, but a name I had been given back then in the program. His eyes narrowed and he asked, what program? And she said, you already know, or you would not be sitting here. You would be sitting across from someone asking you the same questions. We were not soldiers. We were subjects, tools, trained, broken, rebuilt. We were taught to speak languages. We never learned to read documents. We never saw to move in and out of places without leaving footprints, and then we were erased from record, our minds scrambled or wiped or sealed shut until the next activation. Stood slowly, began to pace the edges of the room as if trying to contain the thoughts bouncing off the walls of his mind. He said, we were told the program failed. The subjects were unstable to dangerous to unpredictable. The last file said you all vanished in the fire. She gave him a half smile, a tired one, and said, we did vanish because that was the plan. They buried us alive in silence and shadows, but a few of us slipped through, not by accident, by design. I was extracted before the fire by someone who thought I was worth saving. Hast who? And she shook her head. You would not believe me if I told you, and even if you did, they are already gone, long gone. Maybe they knew this day would come. Maybe they knew that the tattoo was not just a mark, but a key, that someone someday would see it and remember and unlock the doors they sealed shut. Commander opened a secured laptop and pulled up a series of old encrypted files, some partially corrupted, others marked with restricted tags from black sites he no longer had access to. He turned the screen toward her and asked, do you recognize any of these faces, any of these names? She looked for a long moment, then pointed slowly to one photo, then another, and said, that one was my handler. That one trained us in sensory disruption, and that one tried to kill me when I asked what year it was after an assignment in Kiev. Shrugged her wrist absent-mindedly where the tattoo was just barely visible below the sleeve and said, The mark was given only to those who passed Phase 5, the ones who came back, the ones who endured the last test. We were told it was ancient, some symbol found etched into a stone wall in the Middle East where no modern tools could reach a symbol. Found near a burial site with no bodies, just ash and weapons melted together as if something ended violently and suddenly, and without explanation he stopped pacing and stared at her, the air between them thick with the cue. The storm rolled in that night, faster than expected, dark clouds heavy with electric tension crackling across the sky like warning shots from above. The base lights flickered once, twice, then held steady as if uncertain whether to fight or give. Into the weight of what was coming inside the operations wing, the commander stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the desert disappear beneath sheets of rain, his mind still turning over every word. The woman had spoken, her voice calmer. Memory sharper than someone who had supposedly been erased and buried by a program that was never meant to be remembered, sat in the adjacent briefing room alone, silent, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes scanning the wall as if she could see through it, into the storm, into the past, or maybe into what was waiting beyond the storm, something she had been trained not to name, not to feel, just to obey and survive. She remembered the others now in fragments of faces and voices and static. And redacted reports burned into her mind. They had been close once, maybe not in friendship, but in suffering, in silence, in survival, and now that the signal had returned, the connection between them was no longer just memory, it was magnetic. It pulled at her like gravity. Commander returned with a dossier, old battered corners curled with timing, faded but still legible in the harsh light. He placed it on the table before her and opened it, revealing photographs, surveillance records, and satellite captures of locations marked with an X and strange notes written in a cipher only someone from the program would recognize. She leaned forward, touched the edge of one photo, and said, "This is where it began, not where we trained, not where we were chosen, but where they found it. Whatever it is they used to make us different." He asked, "Where is it?" And she said, "Beneath the rock plain in the zone that was once considered dead earth. No signals, no movement, just heat and static, the kind of place people pass over without knowing what lies just beneath their feet. But we went there once on our final mission. It was our test, our reckoning, and some of us never left." He asked, "How many?" And she said, 10 went and 5 came out to were deemed unstable. 1 disappeared in the transport, the last was me, and I was told to forget." Commander leaned on the table, eyes locked on hers, and said, "We can get there in 36 hours. I can pull a Blackbird, reroute flight plans under classified clearance. But I need to know if we're walking into a grave or something worse." She stared at the photo again, eyes narrowing, the image blurry with heat distortion, but still familiar. She could almost smell the sand, the metal, the burnt air. She said, "It is not a grave, it is a lock, and the signal is the key, and someone somewhere has just turned it halfway." He stood, then turned on the monitor and connected with the intelligence analyst on night watch, a young man named Cole, sharp and fast, fingers always twitching like he knew secrets his body hadn't processed yet. Cole appeared on screen, eyes wide, when he saw the woman in the background, but said nothing, just waited for orders. The commander said, "I need full satellite coverage over this grid. Now infrared, heat mapping, and seismic tracking. I want to know if anything down there is moving, and if it is, how fast." Cole nodded, already tapping commands into the console, his screen filling with data, layers of terrain unfolding in colored bands. Then he paused, frowned, zoomed in, and said, "Sir, you're going to want to see this." He pushed the feed to the main screen, and there it was, a heat signature, faint but real, pulsing from beneath the rock plain exactly where the photo had been taken. A rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat, slow and steady and far too large to be natural. The woman stood, her voice low. "It has started. They are waking up." The commander said, "Who is they?" And she answered, "Not people, not anymore, maybe not even then. We were the test. They were the source, the original design, the ones who survived the first collapse and buried themselves deep enough to wait for the next cycle. We were made from their code, their blood, their memories, and now they want it back outside." The rain turned to wind, and the sand began to rise in waves across the compound, as if the desert itself had been stirred from slumber. Inside the base, preparations began quietly. A team assembled under the radar to transport aircraft, fueled and ready. By dawn, the commander sent encrypted orders to former contacts now buried in intelligence agencies across 3 continents, calling in favors that were not supposed to exist, reaching out to men and women who owed their lives to him and who would come without asking why the woman was issued temporary clearance, a uniform without rank, and a weapon she checked over slowly with the familiarity of someone who had once lived by the weapon and now treated it like a necessary burden. She moved through the hangar unseen by most eyes, though a few young soldiers watched her with thinly veiled curiosity, sensing there was something different about her, something dangerous that had nothing to do with the pistol on her high pad, the edge of the flight deck. The commander approached her again and said, "Once we cross that line, I can't promise we come back," she said. "I never planned to," and he nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant, because somewhere inside him he had felt it too. The pull, the signal, the weight of forgotten truths climbing back into the world like smoke through a broken seal. Before they boarded, he handed her a small object, a metallic token etched with a number and a symbol, the same one on her tattoo, and she stared at it confused until he said, "I found it on the last man who tried to run from the program. He did not make it far, but he kept this on him until the end. Maybe he believed it could protect him, or maybe he believed it was a reminder of who he really was, and I thought maybe you should have it." She took it without a word, closed her fingers around it, and walked toward the ramp, the engines roaring behind her, the sky still boiling with wind and sand and static, and the sense that something ancient had opened its eyes and was waiting for them to come home. The aircraft cut through the sky like a silent blade, its black body barely visible against the shifting gray of the storm clouds. The woman sat near the back, her gaze fixed on the floor as if tracing invisible patterns, the token still clenched tightly in her hand beside her. The commander watched her, not speaking, not asking, just reading her silence like a map. He had followed silence before in war, in betrayal, in grief, and this silence felt like all 3 layered and stretched thin over something ancient and waiting. The crew knew better than to ask questions. They were handpicked for loyalty, not curiosity, their eyes forward, their mouths shut, but still a few of them glanced back now and then, trying to make sense of the woman who wore no name, no badge, no insignia, just a look in her eyes that made them sit straighter and check their weapons. TWICEAs. The hours passed, the landscape below changed from city lights to cracked wastelands to barren plains. The further they flew, the quieter it became. The static and the radios grew stronger. The instruments flickered just slightly enough to remind them they were flying toward something that did not want to be found and did not want to be touched. Finally spoke as they neared the drop zone, her voice barely above the roar of the engines. "The place we are going is not on any map because it is not meant to be. It was hidden long before maps were made. Before language, before war, it is older than we understand and deeper than we can reach. They did not build it, they uncovered it, and then they tried to use it, and we are what is left of that mistake." The commander nodded, his face unreadable, and said, "Then we do not touch it unless we have to," and she looked at him and said, "If it sees us, we are already part of it." The plane dipped low, hitting turbulence, sharp and sudden. One of the pilots muttered a curse over comms, then silence as the engines steadied again, and below them the terrain opened into a vast scar of black rock and shadowless ridges, a place that looked like it had been scorched not by fire but by time itself. Aircraft hovered and the ramp lowered. The team moved with discipline, dropping into the dust one by one, their boots hitting ground that felt too solid to still. The woman was last, stepping off the ramp into air that was heavier than it should have been. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat adjusted as if the place itself was calibrating her back into alignment like a machine being reactivated after years of slumber. They moved toward the entrance, a fracture in the ridge nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, and she knew the way like she had never left. Her steps guided not by memory but by instinct, each step a silent echo of the last time she had walked this path, but that time she had not left alone. That time there were 5 of them, 3 men to women, and she could still hear their names in her head, could still feel the moment one of them screamed just before the door closed behind them forever. The entrance was sealed, but not with steel, not with locks, but with something older, something that shimmered faintly in the shifting light. Like heat rising from stone, she stepped forward, raised the token, and pressed it against the mark etched into the rock, and there was a sound low and deep like a breath taken after 1,000 years, and the seal faded like smoke pulled into the earth, and the door opened without a sound. Inside the darkness was not just the absence of light, it was a presence, a pressure that settled on their shoulders and wrapped around their thoughts. The commander activated his light, but it barely pushed the darkness back, and the others followed in tight formation, weapons raised, but silent. The woman led them, her steps sure, her breathing calm. This was where it all had started, and maybe where it all would end. The corridor slop. The voice faded, but its echo lingered, not in the chamber, not in the air, but in the bones of every person standing there, like a vibration that had no sound and yet was deeply felt. The commander lowered his radio slowly, his face unreadable, his training pulling him toward analysis, toward control, but even he knew control was no longer in reach. The woman turned from the wall, eyes still shadowed by the weight of recognition, and said, "It knows we are here, and it has started calling to the others, not just those who were marked, not just those who survived, but everything that carries the same frequency, everything born of the program, of the design, of the source saying of the soldiers." Stepped forward, his voice tight with confusion and fear. "What the hell is this place, and what do you mean everything?" She looked at him for a long second and then said, "This place was not built by us or for us. It was discovered beneath ruins older than any written record, a buried system of chambers and corridors mapped by resonance, not light. Its structure defies logic, its purpose defies language, but the ones who found it believed they could understand it, and when they could not, they tried to weaponize it." Commander moved closer, his voice low and controlled. "You are saying this is not human origin?" She nodded. "It is not, and it never was. We were not the first to be reshaped by it. We were only the first to be reshaped and still survive long enough to remember, and now it is remembering." USA deep vibration passed through the floor again, not a tremor, but a pulse like a heartbeat, massive and slow and alive. One of the younger soldiers stumbled back, clutching his head as if the sound was inside his skull, not around it. He dropped his weapon, and the woman caught him, steadying him without effort, whispering a sound in a language the others could not place, a phrase that silenced the noise and calmed his breath. Commander watched her more closely now and said, "How do you know how to do that?" And she answered, "Because I was taught before my memories were burned, before my identity was broken apart and rebuilt. I was taught to listen to the dark, to hear the signal and respond in kind. It is not just sound, it is command. And if you do not learn to answer it, you will be swallowed by it." He moved deeper into the complex, following the new corridor that had revealed itself, the path now pulsing dimly with light underfoot, guiding them not to safety but to significance. The walls no longer bore carvings, instead they shimmered with a strange fluid metal that reflected not their bodies but their thoughts, memories, emotions, flickering images that should not have been visible yet danced across the surface like ghosts. Soldier froze, staring at one of the walls, his eyes wide as the image of a woman appeared, a face he had not seen since childhood, a voice long gone yet now whispering his name. He reached for it, fingers brushing the wall, and the woman snapped her voice sharp, "Do not touch it. It will take more than memory from you, and once it begins, you will not be able to stop it." He pulled back, shaking pale, as the image vanished, the wall smooth again, as if nothing had been there at all. Commander stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels branched outward and asked which way, and the woman did not speak. She simply closed her eyes, raised her hand, and waited. After a moment, she pointed left and said, "That way. The source is waiting, the center is near. And it is listening for me, it is listening for all of us now." They walked for what felt like hours, time losing meaning in the stillness, the air warmer now, the walls glowing brighter, the signal growing stronger with each step behind them. The tunnels shifted slowly, not closing, but twisting, changing, like the place was reshaping itself around them, a living maze that moved with thought and memory, and the deeper they went, the less real the outside world began to feel. At last they reached the heart. A massive chamber, circular and smooth, the ceiling lost in darkness, the floor carved with symbols that pulsed with light. The center held a structure, a pillar of black stone floating slightly above the ground, rotating slowly, humming with power. And inside it, barely visible, was something organic, something moving, something not yet awaketh. Woman stepped forward, drawn by a force older than choice, the token in her pocket burning hot against her skin. The commander followed slowly, eyes scanning. The structure weapons raised, the team on edge, fingers tight on triggers, but none of them fired, none of them spoke. The silence here was complete, not absence, but presence thick, and Toddles turned to them, her voice low. It is not just a power source. It is not just a machine, it is a memory, one that is waiting to be claimed or rejected, and if we do not choose, someone else will, and they already know we are here. Suddenly the chamber shifted, the light and the symbols turned red, the hum grew louder, and a new corridor opened with a sound like breath reversing, and from that corridor came figures not human but shaped like them, tall and silent, their bodies smooth and pale like stone, their eyes empty and glowing, their movements deliberate like statues brought to life without purpose, only instinct. Soldiers raised their weapons, but the commander held up a hand. Not yet, he said, and the woman stepped between them and the approaching figures, her voice calm but forceful. These are the guardians, not attackers. They are here to test us, to see if we are worthy to remember, and if we fail, they will remove us completely, not out of malice, but out of design. Lead figure stopped in front of her, tilted its head slightly, and raised a hand, not in threat, but in gesture. It spoke not in sound, but in thought, a voice that passed through every mind in the room, asking one question: do you remember? And the woman answered yes, and the token in her pocket vanished, dissolved into light, pulled into the core of the black pillar, which pulsed once, twice, and then went still. Figures turned and walked back into the corridor. The walls dimmed, the hum softened, and the woman fell to her knees, breathing hard, sweat on her brow, eyes wide with the weight of what she had just done. She looked up at the commander and said, it knows me now, it knows all of us, and it will not let us go, not until we finish what was started. There in the chamber shifted after the guardians disappeared. The silence that followed was different, heavier, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the next move. The woman rose slowly, her legs trembling, but her eyes steady, fixed on the black pillar that no longer pulsed, but still seemed alive like a heartbeat. Paused in time. The commander moved closer, his face etched with concern, but also a flicker of something else, respect or fear maybe. Both outside the tunnels, the desert raged, the storm renewed by the strange energy flowing from beneath. But inside, the team had no time to think about whether, only what lay ahead, their mission incomplete, their fate uncertain, and the woman the key to the puzzle, now more burden than weapon. She said, we cannot stay here, the place is waking up, and if it senses us, it will not let go easily. The commander nodded, pulling out his calm and ordering a sweep of the area for any incoming threats and a secure extraction route. The younger soldiers moved out cautiously, their boots stirring dust and shadows, each step echoing in the vast tunnels like a drumbeat warning. Something was watching, waiting in the dark. The woman followed, trailing fingers lightly over the walls, sensing the shift in the ancient structure as if it was alive and breathing and hungry, and her skin prickled with the knowledge that they were intruders in something sacred and dangerous. As they neared the entrance, the light outside was different. The storm had passed, but the air was thick, people with tension, the desert calm but expectant. The commander glanced at her and said, we need to talk about what you said earlier about the source, remembering about the others who carry the signal. She looked at him, eyes narrowing, and said, there are more of us scattered across the world, hidden in plain sight, survivors from different branches of the program, some dead, some lost, some like me awake and waiting for the Cal. Sat on a rock nearby and asked how many, and she shrugged as if the number was both infinite and meaningless. The program was bigger than any government or agency. It was a shadow network of experiments and secrets designed to create soldiers, but became something else, something uncontrolled, something alive, and the tattoos were the mark, the signal. And the Kursethi commander rubbed his temples and said, if that is true, then why now? Why the signal after all this time? She looked out over the horizon where the sun was setting blood red and said, because something has changed, something out there has started the cycle again. The place we found is not just a relic, it is a beacon, and the beacon is calling, and if the call is answered, it will bring everything with it. Younger soldier, who had nearly collapsed earlier, approached slowly, and said, "What happens if you ignore it, if you pretend it is not real?" She looked at him with pity and said, "You cannot ignore the past. It will hunt you or consume you or both. It is not a choice, it is survival, and sometimes survival demands sacrifice." And he nodded, swallowing hard, but the question hung heavy between them. What sacrificeth? T moved back toward the aircraft, the desert quiet except for the whisper of the wind and the distant crackle of radio static. The woman looked back one last time toward the tunnel entrance and said, "This is not the end, it is only the beginning, and we must be ready because what comes next will not wait for us to prepare." Commander ordered final checks on gear and weapons. Attention in the air. Like the calm before a storm, his thoughts racing through contingencies and plans, but the woman stood apart, her eyes closed, her mind reaching out into the darkness, the signal humming at the edges of her Konsk.